Sure, we had a pretty rough time along the California coast with marine mammals washing up on shore and dying from toxins. It was pretty brutal.
We here rely on the Marine Mammal Care Center in San Pedro, and they give us their expertise in these cases and tell us what we should look ahead to this year.
So, what is going on? We have 3 members of the Marine Mammal Care Center with us today on What the Hell to talk about what we saw last year when we saw all of those poor sea lions and other sea life getting sick from toxic algae, and maybe what else might be lurking out there that might be a threat to our sea life.
I'm Hal Eisner along with Elsa Ramon and Hunter Lowry, and this is What the Hell.
Smart, fresh, and uplifting. We've got the stories that make you want to say,
What the hell?
Joining us are the CEO of the Marine Mammal Care Center, John Warner, as well as Dave Bader, the Chief Operations and Educational Officer, and veterinarian Dr. Michelle Rivard to talk about some of the issues that they have to deal with on a daily basis. You know, John, we talked a couple of years ago when you first joined the Marine Mammal Care Center as the CEO, and you were dealing at the time with a stranding emergency caused by toxic algae bloom. That was at the same time as the Palisades and Altadena fires. Can you remind us what happened and whether this is going to be the new norm?
Yeah, so I think in 2023, it happened the first time in more of a public manner with animals stranding from domoic acid toxicosis. That's from a toxic algae bloom that formed off of the coast of Southern California. And at the time, just 2023 was the worst that we had seen on record in terms of marine mammal strandings. That was beat in early 2025 by yet another toxic algae bloom that happened, as you mentioned, at the same time as the fires in Palisades and Altadena. That was then the worst that we had ever seen, and involved more species of marine life, with dolphins stranding in very large numbers as well. And for dolphins being 100% mortality event, which Dr. Rivard can talk more about, of course, in just a few. But is it the new norm? I think that plus the unknown, that we don't know what's happening, as well as a few other things that we'll get into later, are going to be our new norm as we enter into a world that's rapidly changing. Our environment is changing faster than we can predict it, and faster than we know what is coming at us. The historical record is pretty long in terms of climate variations, and a lot of this is happening in such quick time frames that there really is no precedent to look back towards. So we have to be prepared for whatever may come our way. And since Los Angeles is heavily populated, every animal that strands here is not just animal welfare issue, it's a public safety and a public health issue on top of that.
Oh, absolutely. I remember last year people were coming up to, we had to, in the media, remind people not to come up to the stranded sea lions. They are sick and they may attack you. But I want to go back to something you said, really, with what's happening globally, basically climate change. When we asked if this is going to be long term, what do you see happening because of climate change in regards to the domoic acid, the toxic algae blooms, those types of things? We're watching the coral reefs slowly erode away. You know, there's a lot of changes going on in our oceans around the world, and I suspect that there's going to be more beyond this connected to climate change.
Yeah, I think I'll probably pass it to Dave in just a second, but I think you're absolutely right. The changes that we're seeing are happening fast. They're concerning, to say the least, and they're happening in ways that we can see the consequences of it in our day-to-day lives. Whether you live close to the ocean or whether you're on land, we see climate change happening year to year. I mean, I used to be at the very beginning of these changes happening. I'd, call my mom or my aunt and say, God, it seems so much hotter than it was 20 years ago. Oh, yes, and definitely than 40 years ago, right? You'd have those spans. But now you could say last year or 6 months ago. Things are just changing. And what those changes are going to end up being is, I still think, a mystery. But I think as we get into this conversation, the thing that's important to remember is these changes can still be stopped. And the worst of what can come our way can still be prevented. And, I hope we talk more about this. It's the only thing in our way is the will to do it and to stop it. That simple. Technology, money, resources, the know-how, all of that is there. It's simply the will. And, the will is a hard thing to change, obviously. But if you want to know more about the technical changes, I definitely, Dave can speak a lot more to that.
Well, Dave, you're up next. So look into your crystal ball and tell us, what do you see happening this year? Is there any chance that it's going to be like the awfulness of last year, or is there no way of telling?
It's sort of difficult question to answer always when we're trying to guess the weather, right? I think that's an important thing for people to understand is weather is what we get on any given day, and climate is what we would expect, over time. And what we're seeing is, especially as John had mentioned, we're seeing an increase in the frequency and intensity of these harmful algal blooms, and we're seeing shifts in, patterns of weather over long periods of time that are, putting us in a position where we're having these high heat days, we're having these extreme wind events. So we talked about the fire that we had in the Palisades. It was an incredible wind event in that one period of time. Now, that in itself isn't climate change, but when we see it over and over and over again, these are the types of patterns and changes we would expect from climate change. And it's not necessarily just about the water getting warmer. It's about when these winds happen. It's the timing of them. Those are shifting. And there's a lot that we still have to know about, what is the secret sauce, the specific conditions that yield a harmful algal bloom. We know that they're increasing in frequency and intensity, but we don't know the exact combination of events that then yield these blooms. What's going to happen this year? What we've recognized is that we're sort of in a condition that's always primed for one of these blooms to happen. And whether it happens or not is the trick. And sometimes, the particular type of algae that causes this neurotoxin is out there and producing the toxin, but we don't see the results in stranding of animals. And sometimes we see the animals stranding before we even detect the toxin or the algae. The animals can often be our best indicator. We talk about California sea lions as a sentinel species. They're helping us to know about the ocean. They're, in effect, sampling the ocean in a way that we can't. But often in science, it leaves us with more questions than answers. But the patterns we can see, and those patterns are not trending towards, positive outcomes for human life and wildlife. We're seeing these changes happening towards the negative.
I have a question for Dr. Rivard. I assume it's okay to call you Michelle. Is that right?
Yeah, you can call me Michelle.
Michelle, there have been many times, well, more than a few times, that I've been out on the beaches and we've seen beached whales out there. And first of all, I love whale watching. I love going out into the water. I'm a big cruise fan. I like the seas. And when I see a beached whale, I also see what looks like a tourist attraction. That there are throngs of people out on the beach and on the cliffs and looking down. And oh my God, I've never seen anything that looks like that before. And I mean, it is unusual to see a whale in that condition. But I mean, go ahead and tell people what your concerns are when it comes to coming out and seeing a beached whale as a bit of a tourist attraction.
So certainly Los Angeles County, that's a little bit more difficult because our beaches are quite busy here. So our major concern, if we see a dead beached whale in Los Angeles counties, we collaborate very closely with ORA. They're an organization that does dead animal response. So our biggest priority is supporting them and trying to get out and sample these large animals that have stranded dead on the beach so that we can learn more about why they stranded. Because if you're talking about whales, those are animals that are, really quite inaccessible. So we want to try and learn everything we can from animals that strand dead by conducting what we call a necropsy, which is basically an autopsy on these animals. And as you can imagine, that's quite an undertaking when we have a large whale on the beach. The reasons that we find most commonly for some of these large whale strandings are ship strike, entanglement. We had a couple of animals during this domoic acid bloom that Aura and Pacific Marine Mammal Center down in Orange County necropsied. They found high levels of domoic acid in these animal stomachs. So we don't know for certain that that's why they died, but we know they consumed a lot of it. So our biggest concern really is first try to learn as much as we can about these animals. And then secondarily, like John alluded to earlier, there's a lot of infectious or zoonotic diseases. Zoonotic diseases are diseases that humans can catch from animals. So outside of learning everything we can from these animals, we really want to try and keep people away because it can be a threat to themselves, to their pets. So it's really important to have people keep a safe distance from any stranded marine mammal, whether it's dead or alive on beaches.
But as a follow-up, what could I get if I got too close to a dead whale?
I worry the most about brucellosis, which is a disease that can cause meningitis and reproductive failure. So a little different than, they get all kinds of gross stuff that you may have never heard of.
Okay, when you put it like that.
Whoa.
Yeah, so sea lions
can I add one?
Animals are different.
Can I add one thing, Hal? You mentioned a tourist attraction, and what I would say instead is an educational opportunity. So the reason those people are there, and in 24 we had a fin whale that stranded alive, and when they're alive, that falls under Marine Mammal Care Center's sort of lead permit, but we work collaboratively, as Michelle mentioned. And watching an animal die in front of you that you could do nothing about is difficult. It's difficult for us, but it's very difficult for the public when you're talking about such a iconic species that people just love, right? I mean, it's whales go right to the heart of everyone, and so there's an opportunity to really talk to people about what's going on, what's happening in this particular whale's instance. It was on Rat Beach in Torrance. I don't know. I think Hal, you covered it on Fox, and the best thing we could do was let that animal die with dignity and with peace and really step back, send it positive energy, say a prayer, whatever it is in your cultural norms. And people really did that. And then we had conversations with people about the state of whales and what kind of whale this is, why it might have stranded, what we want to learn. The next day when a necropsy was performed on the beach, people came and wanted to just learn. So it was less of a like a selfie moment, which I'd call a tourist attraction, and more of a wow, I care so deeply, I really want to understand moment. And we want to be there for that. So
right, and I'm glad you put it that way, because I think, reflecting back, and thanks for your comments, but I do remember that a lot of the people were more it was curiosity. It wasn't like, a star coming down the red carpet, but it really was more about, the life of the whale, the death of the whale, what kind of whale. There was just so much curiosity, I think, along the beaches when that happened naturally. I mean, these things are underwater; we don't get to see them,
right?
So,
yeah,
Can I add to that
I'm
point?
glad you put it that way. Yeah, go ahead,
Dave. I want to say one thing, Dave, before, because everyone got excited with gross stuff that Michelle started talking about. If you want a reason to stay away from a whale when it strands, lice, big lice, like big yucky lice that Michelle's so used to and isn't really fazed by a lot of people on our team, but they're covered in lice, which Dave can also talk to you about. So don't go touch them unless you want to.
Let's not see pictures, at least.
Brucella. It's mostly a part of their normal flora. But sometimes if they are compromised and they tend to be a little bit more slow moving or not exhibiting their normal behaviors, they'll have higher accumulations of lice. So it actually can be a bit of an indicator of the animal's overall health. So if they're more compromised, usually they have more whale lice. But that's the
Got
least
it.
of your worries.
Well,
I'll say.
It's gross.
yeah, definitely. Regarding the sea life and the animals, you sort of put it in a way that says that the marine life can be a barometer before you guys even know there's a domoic acid problem, toxic algae bloom, that kind of thing. How are you constantly keeping tabs on the health of the sea and maybe trying to get ahead of some of these things if you can?
Well, we work with our partners. We have a great group of organizations that work along the coast that are studying the oceanography, that are studying the waters themselves, that are looking for these harmful algal blooms, as we call them. The reason why we know that there are times when we have, the algae and the domoic acid out in the water, but not the strandings, is because we have this amazing network of sampling devices out there and organizations that are looking at this data. Our ability to sample the ocean is very spotty, right? We can only sample where we have a sensor or where we have somebody collecting a sample, and that's very little of the ocean. Sea lions and the sea life themselves are really exploring all of it, right? From the surface to the depths. And, their ability to access resources and in different spaces is much bigger than ours. And so when we see the marine life, sick, it's often our first indicator that there's something going on out there in the ocean. And where we see it is on the shore. I think when people, what people know about the ocean is often what they can see right at the shore. It's really difficult to explore the ocean. We know more about the surface of Mars and the moon than we know about, the surface, the bottom of our own ocean, even right off the coast of Los Angeles. And like John was saying, it's that educational opportunity. Even that night, we were seeing, different organisms coming out at night. You're not usually at the beach at night, and people were learning about the sand crabs that were coming out that night next to the big whale. And we have by the wind sailors that are every now and then show up on our shores, and they're coming down the coast right now too. So people's kind of interaction, their ability to learn about what's happening out in the ocean, often comes from that interface with the beach, with the shoreline. And here in Los Angeles, there are so many people that are accessing that space as well. So sort of like the sea lions, if something happens on the shore, in Los Angeles County, we're going to hear about it. We're going to know about it. And that's one of the reasons why the Marine Mammal Care Center rescues more marine mammals per mile of coastline than anywhere else in the nation. It has a lot to do with the eyeballs that we have on that particular resource.
I have a question for John. We had spoken earlier, and we talk about domoic acid and the damage that it wrought last year, but you brought up some other stuff I hadn't even thought about that is affecting animals on the coast and at sea, including avian flu, which I hadn't even thought about. So can you bring us up to date on that?
Yeah, I'm gonna give you what the things are, and then I'm gonna ask Michelle to talk about them. As you get a little trend here in my doing this, right? But yeah, avian influenza is definitely on the worry list in terms of things that, if you said what might tomorrow bring that makes you maybe not get a good night's sleep, that's one of them. The warm water blob. I don't know if you remember. I think Hal, again, you covered this. Back in 13, 14, 15, 16, that time frame, when the ocean heated up to a degree we never saw before, and that's from the bottom to the top of the water table there. It made all the prey fish go out into deep, cold water, and there was a mass starvation event on the shores. We're seeing the temperature of the ocean right now at very, very high levels, not necessarily all the way from the top to the bottom, but that warm water blob event where it's thousands of starving pups the cutest little things you ever saw. And you talk about Los Angeles with people everywhere. I mean, these are things that are difficult, to say the least. And from a resource perspective, we're not fully resourced to be able to address these stranding events every single time that they come in these different shapes and forms, especially with communicable diseases. So those, as well as the unknown, the things that we don't even know about today, of course, are the scariest of them all. But we just don't know what those are. But with the environment changing so quickly, we will have to expect things that we don't know are coming our way. And so Michelle, I think, could give an update on some of these scarier things I mentioned, as well as any others in her back pocket
Goody.
that keep her up.
Specifically, I want to hear more about the blob. I don't remember the blob. I don't remember Hal covered it. I guess you remember Hal covering it. But what is the warm water blob and what's in it?
Well, what did I answer your first question about avian influenza? How about that?
Yes, the avian influenza. Sorry, I was sidetracked by the blob.
No, that's okay. So one of the things that is a common thread throughout all of this is that most of the diseases that we see that impact the health of marine mammals also impact the health of people. So domoic acid is a causative agent of paralytic shellfish poisoning in people. People can get domoic acid toxicity from eating shellfish that are impacted by it. Avian influenza is another that's been in the news a lot. Birds are the primary reservoir for avian influenza. But if you notice, it's been in the news because it's been transmitted to dairy cattle, to cats, to farm workers. We've had an outbreak of pinnipeds here on the West Coast. Now, most of those, fortunately, have been spillover events, meaning the influenza has been passed directly from a bird to a mammal. But if the virus mutates, which it can, and we know a lot about virus mutation with previous pandemics, if the virus mutates, then it can, instead of transmitting from bird to mammal, can result in mammal to mammal transfer. Now, we have not seen that in the Northern Hemisphere yet, but it could cause some pretty profound effects on our marine mammal populations that could be pretty devastating, and also has the potential to spread to humans as well. So that's why we want to keep a close eye on diseases like avian influenza. The blob that John was referring to is a large warm water event. So we had a pretty tremendous warm water event back in 2015. And because the ocean temperatures warmed, that caused fish to move further offshore. And that made it so that a lot of marine mammals had to travel further to forage. So it impacted the ocean ecosystem at all different kinds of levels. What we saw as a marine mammal stranding network was lots of really, really skinny, sad sea lion pups washing up on the beaches because they weren't able to forage and hunt for food.
You know, when you talk about a warm water blob, it makes me think of like a horror movie where some big blobby thing comes out of the ocean and, but really what we're talking about here is sort of an area of warm water, so warm that is within it can't really survive properly, correct?
Yeah, we're seeing this warm water blob forming, over time, year after year, and it's not a localized event. It stretches from Mexico all the way up to Washington or Alaska. Right now, it's centered a little bit further south than it has in the past. How you mentioned, it's the monster, it's the blob. When you see imagery of this, it moves and it's amorphous and like the blob might move across the land. And what we really hope is that it stays offshore. And what can happen is we can get cold water upwelling along our coast, which is a typical pattern that we see. It feeds the plankton that are the base of the food chain here. It's the food for all of our animals. If that cold water pushes the blob offshore, we're in good shape. If the blob overpowers that, or if the upwelling that we see actually is weaker and we don't get those prevailing winds, we might have that condition where the warm water comes to shore, encompasses the areas that are really important for our sea life to feed upon, and we might see things like Michelle was mentioning that we saw back in 2015.
Does that correspond with an El Nino or La Nina at all, or is it separately its own thing?
It can, but it doesn't have to. And so we're going to see a blob and an El Nino this year. But the blob was last year during the La Nina as well. So it's a separate but related event. We can think about them as marine heat waves. The blob is a more fun name, but a marine heat wave is maybe more descriptive in what it is, and it's persistent. Heat waves on land are sort of ephemeral. They last for weeks. In the ocean, they can last for years.
You know, for as long as I've been going down to the Marine Mammal Care Center, I always have the same image in my mind, and that's the image of these little pools that are out behind the offices. And that's where the sick sea lions and different critters are cared for. It never really changed. It's the same sort of place, same sort of care system. And I think that, it's almost to the credit of the Mammal Care Center that you do have a very reliable system that is in place, that continues to remain in place and functions on a level that has functioned all these many years and decades in the same way it does today.
Yeah, and that's underpinning all of that is people who care and are coming together with common cause, right? And going back to what's the hopeful part of, got to throw some hope in when we talk about things like this. That to me is the hopeful part, because when you talk about it's will that is really the thing that needs to change. That comes from people who care, and I think I am always reminding people of our individual voices that are amplified even more so collectively, and how important those are. And you all know that in the media. And Elsa, you mentioned the media helping to get the message out last year. It was absolutely effective, tremendously effective. And it was effective because people heard it, but also people wanted to understand it and process it and really then put it into action, which they did. And so every time we see one of these events, we have more and more people who are concerned, who are caring, who are supporting either financially or volunteering or spreading the word or calling, their representatives and saying, this is important. Stop messing with the Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act. If anything, tighten protections, not loosen them. And this is, regardless of which administration might be in power, there's always a time when somebody wants to futz with something when the economy's up or down or all around. And I think it's time to start living our values and telling people these are off limits. If anything, we need to do better. And do more of what is working. And that is directly tied to people demanding it. And so when I say that's all it takes, I mean, yes, that's all it takes, because technology is there, resources are there, the understanding of it is there. But that is in short supply these days. And so our goal is to make it in much greater supply. And so thank you for covering these topics so that we could do just that. I love that.
And you guys do so much to support these ocean populations as well. I mean, honestly, you look at the sea lions and the baby sea lions, and they practically do their own PR because they're just so damn cute. But what can the public do to support you guys, as well as encourage our leaders to, help battle climate change? What can an individual do?
Yeah. I think, beginning with caring. I think what John was saying is, we do have an amazing staff and a group of volunteers at the center that have, lived their values and they're working with us. But it was clear that there's a tremendous amount of care from people who are witnessing these events happening right in front of them. And what we need to do is turn that care into action. And use our voice in a way that makes change. We need to talk to our elected officials, at every level, from, the municipal level on up. And it's really important to get involved, not just at the state and federal level when there's elections, but get involved in our local civics, to do things that are going to help, right here at home. And we can do that every day. We can think about what we do in our daily lives, making sure we're treading as lightly as we can, not thinking about recycling as the one action that we take, or buying a Prius, but, making sure that we are walking the walk and talking the talk, reducing the amount that we consume every day, looking at sustainability labels in the foods that we eat, creating markets for things that are helping the planet to heal. And being part of the solution is something that we can all do. And honestly, I think it starts with civics at the local level, and translating that to the state level and the federal level.
I know you have a website. Why don't we tell everybody what it is?
MarineMammalCare.org.
Okay, you got that?
And our Instagram, Marine Mammal Care.
Marine Mammal Care on Instagram.
On Instagram and Facebook, yes. And, if you want to volunteer, marinemammalcare.org/volunteer. If you want to donate, marinemammalcare.org/donate. And just a plug, Dr. Rivard, she's one of two veterinarians that we have. Dr. Peters is our other veterinarian, who are just bring a wealth of expertise in research. And what we're seeing today is all of these changes taking place. All of the animals that didn't make it last year, they can tell us a whole lot about what to expect, what to do differently, what might be coming our way. But it takes resources to process science and to do science. And those resources are just lacking, as we all know, at the federal level this last couple of years. And so people who really care about learning, who care about data driving decisions and research really informing the today and tomorrow, I think invest in people like Dr. Rivard, Dr. Peters, and the collaborative partners that they work with to really drive more science. We have so much that we need to process just ourselves, and that's another way of supporting and getting behind something that's fundamentally American at heart, I think.
Okay. Dr. Michelle Rivard, John Warner, Dave Bader, thank you all so much. I really like the place where you work. What an office. To be able to look out your windows and see those critters and know that you're doing something to help them. Thanks so much for joining us. And that's What the Hal 2.0. I'm Hal Eisner, along with Elsa Ramon and Hunter Lowry. This podcast is produced by Hunter. Jamie Knapp is our technical director, editor, and he handles all of the post-production. Our original theme music is composed by Stuart Pearson. Earlier versions of the podcast were produced at the studios of Fox 11 in Los Angeles and are available through the link in our show notes. This version of the podcast is available on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. And What the Hal 2.0 is produced in Los Angeles, California.